welcome to the video. Today we are going to be reading a story. But first up, we're going to be reading the Bible. Then we are going to be doing the synopsis. Then we are going to be reading Fellowship of the Ring. Hope you guys enjoy. Make sure to like, subscribe, and bell not missing the video. Here's my dad to read the Bible. One breath.
Yay, he did it!
Okay, so we are on 1 Samuel chapter 8, and I just want to point out that just 3 verses ago in yesterday's reading, we read the verse that says, Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. And now we begin the part of the story where Israel whines. So, I'm going to read in a not whiny voice. 1 Samuel chapter 8. This is the English Standard Version. Here we go. When Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn son was Joel, and the name of his second Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba, yet his sons did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah, and said to him, Behold, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed to the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, Obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. According to all the deeds that they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are also doing to you. Now then, obey their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them, which, by the way, are prescribed in the book of Deuteronomy. So, that's not in the 1 Samuel, by the way. So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking for a king from him. He said, These things will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take the 10th of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to the officers and to his servants. That's only if you're being lucky. He will take your male servants and female servants and the best of your young men and your donkeys and put them to his work. He will take the 10th of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. But the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, No, but there shall be a king over us. But there shall be a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. Because the king's going to fight them all by himself. And when Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, Obey their voice and make them a king. Samuel then said to the men of Israel, Go every man to his city. And that's the end of 1 Samuel chapter 8. And something that I just thought of when they said the king will go out before us and fight our battles, maybe you should look at...
What God does?
Well, time out. Can you let me? Maybe you should look at... 2 Samuel chapter 11 verse 1 and decide whether or not David was out there fighting the battles for the Israelites. So that's just my 2 cents on that one. All right, so now we come to the synopsis. So yesterday's chapter was quite a chapter, actually, and they went to... they left Brie, first of all. They ate all the cheese they could handle, and they left Brie. That's not easy being cheesy, sorry. Okay, and that was the joke of the day, so if you missed it, then sorry. Okay, and it seemed like that Kearney, what's his name, turned them in to the Black Riders, and there was a big commotion, something for them to talk about for a long time, and then Strider led them out through the main gate, and they after a while they finally went out into the Wilderland, and then they went up to Weathertop, and the Black Riders were pursuing them, and then they finally caught up with the Black Riders, and so Strider was talking to the Black Riders, and the Black Riders said, "Oh yeah, we heard that you were really musical, and we thought that you could teach us a rhyme." And so Frodo got up on the table that was out in the middle of the wilderness, we don't really know why, and he started singing a song that Bilbo taught him about dwarves. And so that was, and then the Black Riders all clapped, and then they went back to Mordor, and that's the end of the story.
You know how intensely
real?
frustrating this is?
You know how frustrating this is, Dad?
He either ends the story, kills off all the main characters, or hands the ring off to somebody else.
I didn't do that this time.
I know, but you still ended the story. Okay. What actually happened was everything Dad said up until Strider talked to the Black Riders. He was right up until then. What actually happened was Frodo saw the Black Riders, so he goes over and tells Strider, so they all hide in this hollow where they set up camp, and later that night the Black Riders come and attack, and they and Frodo, he very foolishly at that puts on the ring. Like, okay, I do give him credit that the ring is basically sentient and is basically telling him, put me on.
Put me on.
But I do give him that, but honestly, he should have known better. He attacks one of the riders. I think he gets him in the foot with his sword, and then the ring comes off. He has it in his writing hand, and it's his right hand. I remember that. And then he, either the chapter ends or he blacks out. One or the other. I'm going to hand it off to Dad. Oh, they also started a fire, and I remember Strider had a torch, and he was waving it around.
Nobody appreciates my make-believe stories. I like them. I think they're fun. Gosh.
I appreciated the one with the hand.
The one with the hand. All right. So, we're on chapter 12, Flight to the Ford. It is 18 pages. We're starting late. I don't really anticipate that we're going to be able to finish tonight. It might, unfortunately, it is the last chapter of Book 1 of Fellowship of the Ring. If you notice, the title, the file is called Fellowship 1-12, and that 1 signifies Book 1. And then we have Book 2, which begins a little bit later. So anyway, just like in Ben-Hur, they had books, and it was usually time-based. So this thing happened, and then Book 2, this other thing happened, time or event-based. Anyway, so now we're on Chapter 12, Flight to the Ford. Let's begin. When Frodo came to himself, so he did black out, he was still clutching the ring desperately. You know what? I was actually thinking about this. I think that he should, like, get a pocket in the leg of his trousers.
That way you can't reach it.
That he can't reach it easily, and put the ring in that. And then it would be less easy for him to accidentally slip it on. So anyway, I'm sorry. One sentence in, and I already distracted myself. When Frodo came to himself, he was still clutching the ring desperately. He was lying by the fire, which was now piled high and burning brightly. His 3 companions were bending over him. "What has happened? Where is the Pale King?" he asked wildly. They were too overjoyed to hear him speak to answer for a while.
GG, settle. Color something.
They were too overjoyed to hear him speak to answer for a while, nor did they understand his question. At length he gathered from Sam that they had seen nothing but the vague, shadowy shapes coming toward them. Suddenly, to his horror, Sam found that his master had vanished, and at that moment a black shadow rushed past him, and he fell. He heard Frodo's voice, but it seemed to come from a great distance, or from under the earth, crying out strange words. They saw nothing more until they stumbled over the body of Frodo, lying as if dead, face downward, on the grass with his sword beneath him. Strider ordered them to pick him up and lay him near the fire, and then he disappeared. That was now a good while ago. Sam plainly was beginning to have doubts again about Strider, but while they were talking he returned, appearing suddenly out of the shadows. They started, and Sam drew his sword and stood over Frodo, but Strider knelt down swiftly at his side. "I am not a Black Rider, Sam," he said gently, "nor in league with them. I have been trying to discover something of their movements, but I have found nothing. I cannot think why they have gone and do not attack again, but there is no feeling of their presence anywhere at hand." When he heard that Frodo, or what Frodo had to tell, he became full of concern and shook his head and sighed. Then he ordered Pippin and Merry to heat as much water as they could in their small kettles, and to bathe the wound with it. "Keep the fire going well, and keep Frodo warm," he said. Then he got up and walked away, and called Sam to him. "I think I understand things better now," he said in a low voice. "There seem only to have been 5 of the enemy. Why they were not all here, I do not know, but I don't think they expected to be resisted. They have drawn off for the time being. But not far, I fear. They will come again another night if we cannot escape. They are only waiting because they think that their purpose is almost accomplished, and that the ring cannot fly much further. I fear, Sam, that they believe your master has a deadly wound that will subdue him to their will. We shall see." Sam choked with tears. "Don't despair," said Strider. "You must trust me now. Your Frodo is made of sterner stuff than I had guessed, though Gandalf hinted that it might prove so. He is not slain, and I think he will resist the evil power of the wound longer than his enemies expect. I will do all I can to help and to heal him. Guard him well while I am away." He hurried off and disappeared again into the darkness. Frodo dozed, though the pain of his wound was slowly growing, and a deadly chill was spreading from his shoulder to his arm and side. His friends watched over him, warming him and bathing his wound. The night passed slowly and wearily. Dawn was growing in the sky, and the dell was filling with gray light when Strider at last returned. "Look!" he cried, and stooping he lifted from the ground a black cloak that had him there hidden by the darkness. A foot above the lower hem there was a slash. "This is the stroke of Frodo's sword," he said. "The only hurt that it did to his enemy, I fear, for it is unharmed. But all blades perish that pierce the dreadful king. More deadly to him was the name of Elbereth, and more deadly to Frodo was this." He stooped again and lifted up a long, thin knife. There was a cold gleam in it. As Strider raised it, they saw that near the end of its edge was notched, and the point was broken off. But even as he held it up in the growing light, they gazed in astonishment, for the blade seemed to melt and vanished like smoke in the air, leaving only the hilt in Strider's hand. "Alas," he cried, "it was this accursed knife that gave the wound. Few now have the skill in healing to match such evil weapons, but I will do what I can." He sat down on the ground, and taking the dagger hilt, laid it on his knees, and he sang over it in a slow song in a strange tongue. Then, setting it aside, he turned to Frodo and in a soft tone spoke words the others could not catch. From the pouch at his belt he drew out a long leaf of a plant. "These leaves," he said, "I have walked far to find, for this plant does not grow in the bare hills, but in the thickets away south of the road. I found it in the dark by the scent of its leaves." He crushed a leaf in his finger, and it gave out a sweet and pungent fragrance. "It is fortunate that I could find it, for it is a healing plant that the men of the West brought to Middle-earth. Athelas, they named it, and it grows now sparsely, and only near places where they dwelt or camped of old, and it is not known in the north, except to some of those who wander in the wild. It has great virtues, but over such a wound as this, its healing powers may be small." He threw the leaves into boiling water and bathed Frodo's shoulder. The fragrance of the steam was refreshing, and those that were unhurt felt their minds calmed and cleared. The herb had also some power over the wound, for Frodo felt the pain and also the sense of frozen cold lessen in his side. But the life did not return to his arm, and he could not raise or use his hand. He bitterly regretted his foolishness and reproached himself for weakness of will, for he now perceived that in putting on the ring he obeyed not his own desire, but the commanding wish of his enemies. He wondered if he would remain maimed for life, and how they would now manage to continue their journey. He felt too weak to stand. The others were discussing this very question. They quickly decided to leave Weathertop as soon as possible. "I think now," said Strider, "that the enemy has been watching this place for some days. If Gandalf ever came here, then he must have been forced to ride away, and he will not return. In any case, we are in great peril here after dark, since the attack of last night, and we can hardly meet greater danger wherever we go." As soon as the daylight was full, they had some hurried food and packed. It was impossible for Frodo to walk, so they divided the greater part of their baggage among the four of them and put Frodo on the pony. In the last few days the poor beast had improved wonderfully. It already seemed fatter and stronger, and had begun to show an affection for its new masters, especially for Sam. Bill Ferny's treatment must have been very hard for the journey in the wild to seem so much better than its former life. They started off in a southerly direction. This would mean crossing the road, but it was the quickest way to a more wooded country, and they needed fuel, for Strider said that Frodo must be kept warm, especially at night, while the fire would be some protection for them all. It was also his plan to shorten their journey by cutting across another great loop of the road east beyond Weathertop. It changed its course and took a wide bend northwards. They made their way slowly and cautiously round the southwestern slopes of the hill and came in a little while to the edge of the road. There was no sign of the riders, but even as they were hurrying across, they heard far away two cries, a cold voice calling and a cold voice answering. Trembling, they sprang forward and made for the thickets that lay ahead. The land before them sloped away southward, but it was wild and pathless. Bushes and stunted trees grew in dense patches with wide, barren spaces in between. The grass was scanty, coarse, and gray, and the leaves in the thickets were faded and falling. It was a cheerless land, and their journey was slow and gloomy. They spoke little as they trudged along. Frodo's heart was grieved as he watched them walking beside him, with their heads down and their backs bowed under their burdens. Even Strider seemed tired and heavy-hearted. Before the first day's march was over, Frodo's pain began to grow, but he did not speak of it for a long time. 4 days passed, without the ground or the scene changing much, except that behind them Weathertop slowly sank, and before them the distant mountains loomed a little nearer. Yet since that far cry they had seen and heard no sign that the enemy had marked their flight or followed them. They dreaded the dark hours and kept watch in pairs by night, expecting at any time to see black shapes stalking in the grey night, dimly lit by the cloud-veiled moon. But they saw nothing and heard no sound but the sigh of withered leaves and grass. Not once did they feel the sense of present evil that had assailed them before the attack on the dell. It seemed too much to hope that the riders had already lost their trail again. Perhaps they were waiting to make some ambush in the narrow place. At the end of the 5th day, the ground began once more to rise slowly out of the wide, shallow valley into which they had descended. Strider now turned their course again northeastward, and on the 6th day they reached the top of a long, slow-climbing slope, and saw far ahead a huddle of wooded hills. Away below them they could see the road sweeping round the feet of the hills, and to their right a grey river gleamed pale in the thin sunshine. In the distance they glimpsed yet another river in a stony valley, half veiled in the mist. "I am afraid we must go back to the road here for a while," said Strider. "We have now come to the river Horwell, that the elves call Mythiethel. I don't speak Elvish, sorry. It flows down out of the Etmoors, the Troll Fells north of Rivendell, and joins the Loudwater away in the south. Some call it the Grey Flood after that. It is a great water before it finds the sea. There is no way over it below its source in the Etmoors, except by the last bridge on which the road crosses." "What is that other river we can see so far away there?" asked Merry. "That is Loudwater, the Bruinen of Rivendell," answered Strider. "The road runs along the edge of the hills for many miles from the bridge to the ford of Bruinen, but I have not yet thought how we shall cross that water, one river at a time. We shall be fortunate indeed if we do not find the last bridge held against us." Next day, early in the morning, they came down again to the borders of the road. Sam and Strider went forward, but they found no sign of any travelers or riders. Here, under the shadow of the hills, there had been some rain. Strider judged that it had fallen 2 days before, and had washed away all footprints. No horseman had passed since then, as far as he could see. They hurried along with all the speed they could make, and after a mile or two they saw the last bridge ahead at the bottom of the short, steep slope. They dreaded to see black figures waiting there, but they saw none. Strider made them take cover in a thicket at the side of the road while he went forward to explore. Before long he came hurrying back. "I can see no sign of the enemy," he said, "and I wonder very much what that means, but I have found something very strange." He held out his hand and showed a single pale green jewel. "I found it in the mud in the middle of the bridge," he said. "It is a beryl, an elf stone. Whether it was set there or let fall by chance, I cannot say, but it brings hope to me. I will take it as a sign that we may pass the bridge. But beyond that I dare not keep to the road without some clearer token." At once they went on again. They crossed the bridge in safety, hearing no sound but the water swirling against its three great arches. A mile further on they came to a narrow ravine that led away northward through the steep lands on the left of the road. Here Strider turned aside, and soon they were lost in a somber country of dark trees winding among the feet of sullen hills. The hobbits were glad to leave the cheerless lands and the perilous road behind them, but this new country seemed threatening and unfriendly. As they went forward, the hills about them steadily rose. Here and there upon heights and ridges they caught glimpses of ancient walls of stone and the ruins of towers. They had an ominous look. Frodo, who was not walking, had time to gaze ahead and to think. He recalled Bilbo's account of his journey and the threatening towers on the hills north of the road, in the country near the Troll's Wood where his first serious adventure had happened. Frodo guessed that they were now in the same region, and wondered if, by chance, they would pass near the same spot. "Who lives in this land?" he asked, "and who built these towers? Is this troll country?" "No," said Strider. "Trolls do not build. No one lives in this land. Men once dwelt here ages ago, but none remain now. They became an evil people, as legends tell, for they fell under the shadow of Angmar. But all were destroyed in the war that brought the North Kingdom to its end. But that is now so long ago that the hills have forgotten them, though a shadow still lies on the land." "Where did you learn such tales if all the land is empty and forgetful?" asked Peregrine. "The birds and beasts do not tell tales of that sort." "The heirs of Elendil do not forget all things past," said Strider, "and many more things than I can tell are remembered in Rivendell." "Have you often been to Rivendell?" asked Frodo. "I have," said Strider. "I dwelt there once, and still I return when I may. There my heart is, but it is not my fate to sit in peace, even in the fair house of Elrond." The hills now began to shut them in. The road behind held on its way to the river Bruinen, but both were now hidden from view. The travelers came into a long valley, narrow, deeply cloven, dark and silent. Trees with old and twisted roots hung over cliffs and piled up behind into mounting slopes of pine wood. The hobbits grew very weary. They advanced slowly, for they had to pick their way through a pathless country, encumbered by fallen trees and tumbled rocks. As long as they could, they avoided climbing for Frodo's sake, and because it was, in fact, difficult to find any way up out of the narrow dales. They had been 2 days in this country when the weather turned wet. The wind began to blow steadily out of the west and pour the water of the dimmest seas on the dark heads of the hills in fine, drenching rain. By nightfall they were all soaked, and their camp was cheerless, for they could not get any fire to burn. The next day the hills rose still higher and steeper before them, and they were forced to turn away northward out of their horse. Strider seemed to be getting anxious. They were nearly 10 days out from Weathertop, and their stock of provisions was beginning to run low. It went on raining. That night they camped on a stony shelf with a rock wall behind them in which there was a shallow cave, a mere scoop in the cliff. Frodo was restless. The cold and wet had made his wound more painful than ever, and the ache and sense of deadly chill took away all sleep. He lay tossing and turning and listening fearfully to the stealthy night noises. Wind in chinks of rock, water dripping, a crack, the sudden rattling of a loosened stone. He felt that black shapes were advancing to smother him, but when he sat up he saw nothing but the back of Strider, sitting hunched up, smoking his pipe and watching. He lay down again and passed into an uneasy dream in which he walked on the grass in the garden in the Shire, but it seemed faint and dim, less clear than the tall black shadows that stood looking over the hedge. In the morning he woke to find that the rain had stopped. The clouds were still thick, but they were breaking, and pale strips of blue appeared between them. The wind was shifting again. They did not start early. Immediately after their cold and comfortless breakfast, Strider went off alone, telling the others to remain under the shelter of the cliff until he came back. He was going to climb up if he could, and get a look at the lie of the land. When he returned, he was not reassuring. "We have come too far to the north," he said, "and we must find some way to turn back southward again. If we keep on as we are going, we shall get up to the Ettendales, far north of Rivendell. That is troll country, and little known to me. We could perhaps find our way through and come round to Rivendell from the north, but it would take too long, for I do not know the way, and our food would not last. So somehow or other we must find the ford of Bruinen." The rest of that day they spent scrambling over rocky ground. They found a passage between two hills that led them into a valley running southeast, the direction that they wished to take. But toward the end of the day they found their road again barred by a ridge of high land. Its dark edge against the sky was broken into many bare points like teeth of a blunted saw. They had a choice between going back or climbing over it. They decided to attempt the climb, but it proved very difficult. Before long, Frodo was obliged to dismount and struggle along on foot. Even so, they often despaired of getting their pony up, or indeed of finding a path for themselves, burdened as they were. The light was nearly gone, and they were all exhausted, when at last they reached the top. They had climbed on to a narrow saddle between two higher points, and the land fell steeply away again, only a short distance ahead. Frodo threw himself down and lay on the ground shivering. His left arm was lifeless, and his side and shoulder felt as if icy claws were laid upon them. The trees and rocks about him seemed shadowy and dim. "We cannot go any further," said Merry to Strider. "I am afraid this has been too much for Frodo. I'm dreadfully anxious about him. What are we to do? Do you think we will be able to cure him in Rivendell if we ever get there?" "We shall see," answered Strider. "There is nothing more that I can do in the wilderness, and it is chiefly because of his wound that I am so anxious to press on. But I agree that we can go no farther tonight." "What is the matter with my master?" asked Sam in a low voice, looking appealingly at Strider. "His wound is small, but it is also dressed. It is already closed. There is nothing to be seen but a cold white mark on his shoulder." "Frodo has been touched by the weapons of the enemy," said Strider, "and there is some poison or evil at work that is beyond my skill to drive out. But do not give up hope, Sam." Night was cold up on the high ridge. They lit a small fire down under the gnarled roots of an old pine that hung over a shallow pit. It looked as if a stone had once been quarried there. They sat huddled together. The wind blew chill through the pass, and they heard the treetops lower down, moaning and sighing. Frodo lay half in a dream, imagining that endless dark wings were sweeping by above him, and that on the wings rode pursuers that sought him in all the hollows of the hills. The mountains dawned bright and fair, the air was clean, and the light pale and clear in a rain-washed sky. Their hearts were encouraged, but they longed for the sun to warm their cold, stiff limbs. As soon as it was light, Strider took Mary with him and went to survey the country from the height to the east of the pass. The sun had risen and was shining brightly when he returned with more comforting news. They were now going more or less in the right direction. If they went on down the further side of the ridge, they would have the mountains on their left. Some way ahead, Strider had caught a glimpse of the Loudwater again, and he knew that, although it was hidden from his view, the road to the ford was not far from the river and lay on the side nearest to them. "We must make for the road again," he said. "We cannot hope to find a path through those hills. Whatever danger may beset it, the road is our only way to the ford." As soon as they had eaten, they set out again. They climbed slowly down the southern side of the ridge, but the way was much easier than they had expected, for the slope was far less steep on this side, and before long Frodo was able to ride again. Bill Fearney's poor old pony was developing an unexpected talent for picking out a path, and for sparring its rider as many jolts as possible. The spirits of the party rose again. Even Frodo felt better in the morning light, but every now and again a mist seemed to obscure his sight, and he passed his hands over his eyes. Pippin was a little ahead of the others. Suddenly he turned around and called to them. "There's a path here," he cried. When they came up with him, they saw that he had made no mistake. There were clearly the beginnings of a path that climbed with many windings out of the woods below and faded away on the hilltop behind. In places it was now faint and overgrown or choked with fallen stones and trees, but at one time it seemed to have been much used. It was a path made by strong arms and heavy feet. Here and there old trees had been cut or broken down, and large rocks cloven or heaved aside to make way. They followed the track for some while, for it offered much the easiest way down, but they went cautiously, and their anxiety increased as they came into the dark woods, and the path grew plainer and broader. Suddenly, coming out of a belt of fir trees, it ran steeply down a slope and turned sharply to the left round the corner of a rocky shoulder of the hill. When they came to the corner, they looked round and saw that the path ran on over a level strip under the face of a low cliff overhung with trees. In the stormy wall there was a door hanging crookedly ajar upon one great hinge. Outside the door they all halted. There was a cave or rock chamber behind, but in the gloom inside nothing could be seen. Strider, Sam, and Mary, pushing with all their strength, managed to open the door a little wider, and then Strider and Mary went in. They did not go far, for on the floor lay many old bones, and nothing else was to be seen near the entrance, except for some great empty jars and broken pots. "Surely this is a troll hole, if ever there was one," said Pippin. "Come out, you two, and let us get away. Now we know who made the path, and we had better get off it quick." "There is no need, I think," said Strider, coming out. "It is certainly a troll hole, but it seems to have been long forsaken. I don't think we need be afraid, but let us go down warily, and we shall see." He likes saying this, "we shall see," doesn't he? The path went on again from the door, and turning to the right again across the level space, plunged down a thick wooden slope. Pippin, not liking to show Strider that he was still afraid, went on ahead with Merry. Sam and Strider came behind, one on each side of Frodo's pony, for the path was now broad enough for 4 or 5 hobbits to walk abreast. But they had not gone very far before Pippin came running back, followed by Merry. They both looked terrified. "There are trolls," Pippin panted, "down in a clearing in the woods not far below. We got a sight of them in the tree trunks. They are very large." "We will come and look at them," said Strider, packing up a stick. Frodo said nothing, but Sam looked scared. And I know that this is a terrible place, but it is about halfway through the chapter, and I don't anticipate myself finishing this tonight, just because of my own voice is starting to give out, and I don't want to just absolutely desecrate it. So I hope that you're enjoying the story. Tune in next time for the conclusion of Book 1 of Fellowship of the Ring, which is the first part of Lord of the Rings, and we will finish it tomorrow night. So, God bless you. I hope that you're enjoying the story. Hope you're enjoying the Bible story, and we will see you tomorrow night. God bless. Bye.